Yeah, I tend to work best when I'm reacting to Leonard being wrong, so I think I'll let him go first.
That's how we all work best, is reacting when Leonard's sometimes
It's
wrong.
easy money. I mean,
We love you,
no
Leonard.
shortage of work.
Wow. Welcome to another episode of DirectConnect. My name is Leonard Chamberlin, managing partner with Archer, joined today by my fellow managing partners, Steve Parker and Bryan Carr. Gentlemen,
Howdy.
say hello.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
Hello, hello. In other news, Steve has decided that there is no path to the presidency for him, and he has decided to drop out of the primaries.
That and I'm out of money, Leonard. So
Yeah.
fundraising's been a little weak lately.
Fundraising did not go as planned, Steve. That's true. True. We won't get into the specifics of the platform he was running on, any of that, but unfortunately, yeah.
Yep.
He's gonna have to withdraw.
As I believe we mentioned on a prior DirectConnect or On Target or both, new standards came into effect on January 1st of this year, namely CIP 4-7 and CIP 11-3. These are revisions to the standards to address essentially allowing BES cyber system information, BCSI, to be stored in the cloud. So something that the industry has been moving towards for a while. The degree to which it's already occurring, I don't know. I guess auditors are very curious about that. At any rate, major changes in CIP 4, essentially moving BCSI access management to a new requirement 6, and essentially authorizing provisioned access, whether electronic or physical, to BCSI, rather than focusing on BCSI storage locations or BCSI repositories, as they're often called. CIP 11, complementary changes there to go along with the CIP 4 changes. The main change there is in requirement 1.2, going away from procedures to protect and securely handle BCSI and storage transiting use to something more streamlined. I believe the verbiage is methods to protect and securely handle to mitigate risks of compromising confidentiality. Some interesting changes there. Steve, I'll go to you first. What are some of the concerns you've been hearing about with these revisions or thoughts on these changes?
Yeah, well, first of all, the wording is pretty minimal. I mean, if you look at it, if you did a red line version, an outsider looking at this and say, "Wow, it doesn't look like they really changed all that much." And you mentioned the revisions were done to allow for BCSI in the cloud, yet it doesn't mention cloud. It doesn't say that anywhere in the standards.
Very true.
So unless you know the backstory and kind of the history of how this all came about, it can be rather puzzling for an outsider to look at it. But I think the biggest change is really in CIP 4. You mentioned the move away from designated storage locations. So rather than focusing on identifying where this information is stored and requiring access control and protections around that, they're now saying you need to protect the information whenever there's provisioned access, wherever that may be and however that may be. And I think that change is more significant than most people realize. Depending on how that gets interpreted and how the audit approaches play out, that could be a very significant change that's likely to catch some people by surprise.
You're absolutely right, Steve, on that change. I think it's underappreciated or underestimated as to what the kind of bigger implication is. As we all know, with the CIP standards, every word kind of it counts. And words have meaning, like we always say. And so, while these changes may be minor in appearance, I think the effect is going to be pretty significant. So it's definitely worth noting. I'll provide a quick little commentary on the CIP 4 piece. A lot of people bemoan the use of BCSI storage locations, or repositories, call them what you will. There was an issue that came up in the original V5 drafting team. Attended a lot of those drafting team meetings, and the CIP 11 team, understand if you've never been drafting team meeting, the different standards are divided up by different drafting teams that don't often talk to each other and don't coordinate very much, which is the case here. The CIP 11 drafting team at the time, was working on BES cyber system information and protections, and then the CIP 4 team was working on access management, right? And the CIP 4 team somehow came up with this storage location idea all on their own, and didn't communicate with the CIP 11 team, so you don't see it mentioned in CIP 11. Yet it shows up in CIP 4. There's no provision or requirement to even identify these repositories or storage locations, let alone inventory them. But obviously there's a lot of implied requirements there. So people really struggled with that, reconciling the access management side of CIP 4 with the old CIP 11. So some of these changes will help with that. We're eliminating that storage location piece, but to Steve, to your point, I think it's going to introduce a lot of other potential issues based on the wording they've used.
Yeah, on the topic of wording, this concept of provisioned access, it's not a defined term. I'm not
What does it
sure.
mean? What does it mean, Steve?
We need a modern day Noah Webster to join NERC in these drafting teams, because there's been a recurring habit of drafting teams refusing to define terms, and I get it's not easy to do, and it can be a challenge, but I think it's more challenging to throw it back to industry and have them dealing with words and phrases and terms that are not defined. And what does it mean?
Yep.
Who defines it? How is it applied? There is some very good discussion on the topic in the technical rationale document, but that's not part of the standard. So its usefulness is muted at best, if somewhat limited in how that can be used. So,
Not to disagree with you, Steve, because it's certainly not provisioned access is not an official defined term in the NERC glossary of terms, but I think there's something that really approaches a definition in the parent requirement for R6. Says provisioned access is to be considered the result of the specific actions taken to provide an individual the means to access BCSI. For example, may include physical keys or access cards, user accounts, and associated rights and privileges, and encryption keys. So while I do agree with you that there's no ordained definition for provisioned access, I think this is better than having to just depend on technical guidance or some other regional interpretation of the concept. I mean, I think there is something there in the requirement which would be enforceable. Whether it's a definition or not, I guess, would be the debate.
yeah, I'll give you that point. I think that's valid, and it does add some clarification. There's still going to be, I guess, even with the definition, there's some room for. I hesitate to use the term interpretation because that has official context, but developing alternate understandings of what the word
There you go.
is how I would put it in. My concern would be, a specific action. If I email a file to somebody, that's a specific action, gives them the means to access it. So that wording could be construed potentially to require or consider any access to be provisioned, and then therefore require all the associated access management requirements to go along with any access. And I disagree with that. The technical rationale document actually gives some specific examples of incidental access. Somebody within a company just sharing a file with somebody or showing them a document, or somebody walking by somebody's screen and seeing it. Those are not provisioned access. So I'd be interested in your thoughts, Leonard and Bryan, on situations where there could be authorized access to BCSI, which is not provisioned and therefore would not be required to utilize the CIP4 processes. I have some ideas, but I want to hear your thoughts.
Sure. I think the examples they gave in the technical rationale document are pretty good examples where this situation would play out. For instance, you're in a meeting and BCSI is projected on the screen. You can't provision access to seeing the screen per se in that meeting. Or if you're sharing, a printout of, some BCSI. You're not provisioning access to a printout that you're sharing in a meeting. I think those are the situations more so that it is intended to address when it's talking about, it may not always be possible to provision the access. Sharing data with a third party, just because they don't work for you, it's still possible to provision the access, the means by which you share that data, for instance, a secure file share server, encrypting the data, is another potential interpretation of and there comes that word again, of what it means to provision access, encryption keys is one of the examples that requirement 6 provides. So, provisioning access is not necessarily in this context what we traditionally think of. I think, setting up a user account and specific privileges in Active Directory, for instance. I think it's a little bit more, broad in this sense. Bryan, what are your thoughts, sir?
My thoughts are going a little bit different direction. Yeah, definitely a good point for discussion there. One of the things that we talk about incidental access, you gave some examples there, Leonard, and some of that discussion, it always got me thinking about one of my kind of pet peeves that I feel remains unaddressed as far as access was physical access to, be it a control center or room or whatever, you kind of by default have BCSI access, or you have access to potentially available BCSI. Like that part of it seems to remain unaddressed. I mean, I guess we could wedge it into the current defined terms, alternate understanding terms. I don't know what to call them now, Steve. I think the alternate understanding is a good one. They're AA terms. That could mean a lot of things too. Some of those things, and granted, the standard can't contemplate every possibility, every scenario, but providing kind of those guardrails as to what is this and who's it for, and ultimately keeping in mind what's the ultimate goal here, what are we trying to accomplish. I think this is it's a step in the right direction, but again, like we've been talking about, the real implications of it obviously won't be seen until audits start coming around, until there's more, until industry really gets their arms around it. People think, again, they may understand it right now, but theory and application are two different things. So when we actually see it written out, applied, audited, I think we're going to see vastly different alternative understandings. What was it again?
Alternative understanding. Actually,
I forgot already.
I think there's a example in the technical rationale that speaks maybe to one of your specific scenarios you're referring to, Bryan, and that's it says another example: provisioning access to a substation, the intent of which is to enable an individual to gain access to the substation to perform substation-related tasks, not to access BCSI that may be located there. Yeah. However, BCSI in these locations and situations still needs to be protected against unauthorized access per the responsible entity's information protection program as required by CIP 11.
Yeah.
So I think this is a example where, it's, at least according to the technical rationale, they're saying, hey, this is not intended to address this specific scenario. However, that information should still be protected under CIP 11, specific to your program.
Yep.
So I got a couple of thoughts. Leonard, you mentioned encryption, and we mentioned that they don't, the cloud is not mentioned in the new version of the standards, but the move to the provisioned access really was meant to address the encryption aspect of it, which you mentioned. So providing somebody with encryption keys or the means to decrypt data is provisioning them access to that data. And that was a big part of the rationale of going to that language. Obviously, it encompasses a variety of ways you can provision access. So that's interesting. On that topic too, Bryan, you mentioned the substation scenario or a PSP scenario and other things. Same could be true for information systems. A vulnerability management system, a change ticketing system, things where access is provisioned and they include BCSI. Previously, typically auditors would want you to identify those as designated storage locations and have a specific provisioning for BCSI in those. I don't know that that's necessary anymore. The access is already provisioned, so we have that aspect in place. But they do still have to be protected. And that's another distinction. I'm jumping all over the place here, but another distinction is just because the CIP4 processes are not required doesn't mean the information doesn't still need to be protected. So your CIP 11 program has to allow for protection of all the data in whatever scenario, whatever location, whatever form that it is in. Some of that protection will involve a intentional provisioning of access. In other cases, access may be given under allowed circumstances where other protections are in place, if that makes sense.
Do we need another term then introduced for unintentional provisioning? I mean, where are we going with this?
Well, I think it's, there's authorized access and then there's provisioned access. So provisioned access is a subset of authorized access. Yep. Somebody walking through a control center where they've been given access to the PSP and they walk by and see a diagram hanging on the wall, right?
Yep.
They've gotten access to the BCSI. They saw the BCSI. They weren't provisioned access, but that would presumably be an allowable situation under your CIP 11 plan. It's a secure area. The people going into that area have been vetted, and BCSI is allowed to be displayed in the open, presumably under your plan. So I think if anything, it's going to force a little bit more effort being put into CIP 11 to really define those circumstances rather than relying on just the CIP 4 processes for protection.
I agree with that.
You would hope.
Yeah.
Which actually brings me to another big question that I have that I wanted to discuss today. And that's, in the technical rationale document, it talks about how these new revisions are backwards compatible with the previous version of the standard. However, I think maybe quite a lot of entities may have interpreted that and said, you know what, there's nothing for us to do to update our programs to be compliant with the new versions. I don't know that that's necessarily the case. Just because you want to stick with having BCSI storage locations, I think the intent there was to say, hey, you can still continue to use those. They're backwards compatible with the new verbiage. But I still don't think there's a do nothing, kind of referring to some of the scenarios y'all were just discussing. It's going to require some new interpretations. We can't get away from using that word. Some new perspectives, when thinking about some of these concepts and the degree to which those are or are not documented in, your CIP 4 access management program, your CIP 11 information protection program, and generate corresponding performance evidence, I think will ultimately be the determining factor whether your backwards compatible approach is still compliant going forward.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's not a do nothing option the way I see it. And to the point earlier about more emphasis in the CIP 11 and how you kind of choose your own adventure or define your own terms, alternative understanding. Sorry, it's called AU, not AA. California public school system kid, so sometimes I get acronyms mixed up. So, I would like to see more emphasis on CIP 11, more work put in there to create those scenarios and to address the possibilities that may impact a particular entity.
Yeah, I'll throw another word at you. I know you're trying to avoid the word interpretation, so maybe we can use the word interpolation, and where the auditors fill in the blanks of things that were not addressed in the standard.
Yeah. Interpolation, there it is.
Yes, I did not go to school in California, so I know all those big words, Bryan.
Yeah, I have to look that one up because I don't know what it is. Just kidding. Talking more about this, entities that are under the impression that, hey, there's nothing or very little for us to do, I think you'll be unfortunately sorely mistaken when it comes out, come audit time. I think there is action to be taken, there's updates to be made, and there's new concepts to be considered, to be interpolated. Not interpreted, but interpolated. Can we do that, Steve? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Interpolation?
Interpolation, absolutely.
Yeah, they need to be interpolated.
We're starting a new craze. We're going to interpolate.
So yeah, we'll have stickers coming soon that says interpolate that, whole line of stickers and stuff. No, but yeah, I think that there's work to be done here. So if you haven't done it yet, I would strongly recommend you get working on making some of those updates and changes.
Yeah, and I have one final comment on the backwards compatibility. Maybe that's a good thing that the standard is at least allegedly backwards compatible. Just from a security perspective, though, bear in mind that many vulnerabilities arise from the need to maintain backwards compatibility with old technology. Sometimes you just got to throw out the old stuff and start fresh.
That's a good point to remind people of. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today. And I think we hit on some very interesting interpolations that need to occur, as well as our own perspectives of how to interpolate the requirements and new concepts that these revisions introduce. But anyone out there wants to chat more about CIP 4, CIP 11, and these new requirements, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to share our interpolations with you. So thank you very much for tuning in today, and we'll see you next time on DirectConnect with Archer. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Your support drives us forward. Don't forget to subscribe and enable notifications, ensuring you never miss out on valuable insights. When it comes to safeguarding your business, Archer is your trusted partner. Explore our robust solutions at archerint.com. Get in touch with an email or phone call and fortify your company's defenses. We value your input. Share your thoughts, questions, or topics you'd like us to cover, and tune in every other Wednesday for a brand new episode of Direct Connect.